Among the plethora of crimes humans are known to commit, sexual offenses against children stick out like a sore thumb. Child predators, or pedophiles, are known to get killed in prison because the crime is so bad that even murderers consider pedophiles to be immoral. Whenever such a thing occurs, people tend to see it as poetic justice, and they might have a point. These inmates can be seen as crusaders of justice by most, because to a lot of people, they rid the world of some very vile humans. David Faustino Flores. The Tarrant County Jail, once a place of confinement, underwent a macabre transformation into a chilling crime scene that would forever stain its history. The echoes of that fateful encounter between David Faustino Flores and Clinton Don Simpson reverberate through the shadows, casting an eerie pall over the events that transpired within those grim walls. Clinton Don Simpson had once operated Mr. Don's Whistle Stop, a quaint miniature train attraction nestled on his expansive 2-acre estate in Keller. However, the allure of the whimsical trains would be overshadowed by the sinister allegations that rocked the community in 2007. Accused of heinous acts, Simpson stood charged with the unspeakable offenses of molesting 12 innocent children. His charming facade as a train conductor and former preacher at the Haslet Church of Christ crumbled, revealing a dark underbelly that defied belief. It all began with the haunting revelation brought forth by the parents of a 3-year-old girl, recounting an ordeal their daughter endured while she was riding the miniature train with Simpson at a birthday celebration. As the accusations mounted, Simpson found himself ensnared in a web of charges, facing 10 counts of aggravated sexual assault of a child, a count of continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and 2 counts of indecency by fondling. The world around him shifted from whimsy to wickedness. Amidst the mounting allegations, the wheels of justice stuttered as Simpson was confined to house arrest, his once bustling miniature trains now overshadowed by the stain of suspicion. Yet, the question of his mental fitness to stand trial lingered, leading him to a hospital in 2009 for a crucial evaluation that would determine his fate. Deemed competent to face the charges, the train conductor turned accused predator found himself in the confines of the county jail, awaiting yet another examination of his psychological state. Parallel to Simpson's descent from community figure to accused criminal, David Faustino Flores bore his own criminal history. Charges of violence and theft painted a portrait of a man familiar with the darker aspects of life. As fate would have it, the paths of these two individuals, both consumed by their own personal demons, converged within the medical unit of the Lon Evans Correction Center in Fort Worth. In a cruel twist of fate, both Flores and Simpson found themselves sharing a 4-person cell. The date had arrived for both inmates to undergo medical and mental evaluations, a routine that masked the impending calamity. The clock's hands crept towards 2:15 a.m., and a detention officer peered into the cell to perform a routine suicide watch check. Little did they know that this mundane task would soon be shattered by the eruption of violence that followed. Simpson, confined to a wheelchair, was positioned near the cell door, his gestures frantic as he seemed to plead for attention from the staff. Without warning, Flores pounced, his fists becoming instruments of brutality as they rained down upon Simpson's defenseless form. He delivered 20 punches to the defenseless Simpson until the officer's call for help sliced through the air, summoning assistance in a desperate bid to contain the chaos. Yet the onslaught continued, the ferocity of each blow intensified by an inexplicable fury. As Simpson's body crumpled, Flores withdrew, returning to his bunk as if snapping out of a trance. As soon as Simpson moved his head with an eerie deliberateness, Flores advanced once more, his assault escalating with an almost mechanical precision. 6 punches with one fist, 28 with both, and 5 more with the other. The cell transformed into a chamber of horrors, a stage upon which a malevolent dance of destruction played out. Simpson's wheelchair offered no sanctuary as it toppled under the weight of the onslaught. Flores seized his prey, gripping Simpson's head. The dull thuds of flesh meeting concrete swept through the room as the victim's face was brutally slammed 14 times onto the unforgiving floor. At 2:23 a.m., a mere minute after the assault began, amidst the carnage, a lone officer dared to enter the cell's maw, a last-ditch effort to quell the storm. Even as the officer tried to separate the two, Flores' final blows found their mark. Half a dozen kicks, 1 punch, the symphony of violence reached its crescendo. Simpson was rushed to John Peter Smith Hospital, where he died. Clinton Don Simpson, once a figure of community charm, was now a lifeless vessel of the unspeakable. The hospital doors beckoned, but it was a journey without return. David Faustino Flores, forever etched in infamy, now bore the weight of an additional sin, a charge of murder. As the world grappled with the unimaginable, speculation swirled. Was it vengeance for Simpson's heinous acts, or a darker truth that fueled the brutality? In fact, Simpson would later claim that it was God and his dead mother that told him to commit such a violent act. According to Flores, the voices in his head claimed that Simpson was Bin Laden and he ought to go get him. That was what led to the scuffle in the cell, a brutal, relentless assault which lasted just 1 minute, but was enough to bring Simpson's life to a violent conclusion. In the heart of that Tarrant County jail, the line between ordinary and grotesque, sanity and madness was irrevocably blurred. A tale that began with the innocence of miniature trains and the resonance of a preacher's words ended in a nightmare that defied all understanding. Stephen Sanderson. The murder of Theodore Dyer at the hands of Stephen D. Sanderson sparked a lot of controversy. Some felt the killing was justified, and others felt Sanderson was in no position to exact vigilante justice. The story begins in two different places, with two very different people, but it converged in that prison cell at the Saginaw Correctional Facility. A woman, Mary, and her 9-year-old daughter had moved into a Grand Haven apartment next door to Ted Dyer in April 2012. She and Dyer talked on a daily basis, and she had no reason to worry about the man doing anything to her daughter. Dyer and his girlfriend didn't have any children, so, according to the mother, they sort of adopted her own kids. In June 2013, Mary's daughter was at Ted's apartment, but it had gotten late, so Mary went over to Ted's house to bring her daughter back home. Now, as Mary approached the door, something told her, like a voice in her head, "Don't knock, just walk in." She listened to the voice and went over to Ted's bedroom and bore witness to a sight no parent should ever have to see: her daughter being assaulted by Ted. She slammed the door open, grabbed her daughter, and went back to their apartment, too shocked to even believe she had seen what she just saw. To confirm what she just witnessed, she asked the girl if Ted was really doing what she saw him doing, to which the girl replied, yes. Furious, Mary called 911 and reported the matter to the authorities. Dyer was later arrested and convicted of 1 count of criminal sexual conduct. According to Mary, her daughter never told her, but she did tell detectives that it was like the 3rd time Dyer had done this to her. For his crime, Dyer was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. The other side of this fatally concluded story is Stephen Sanderson, a man with a rather tragic childhood who was in prison for the murder of his girlfriend. He shared a cell with Dyer, but just 10 months into his sentence, Dyer did something that really pissed off Sanderson. During an interrogation, Stephen Sanderson recounted the disturbing sequence of events that transpired within the confines of their shared cell. The words flowing from Dyer's lips had become an incessant source of annoyance to Sanderson, who found himself increasingly agitated by Dyer's self-justifications regarding his case. According to Sanderson, Dyer wouldn't stop trying to deny the conviction or justify it. Perhaps in an attempt to prevent the situation from escalating, Sanderson asked Dyer to stop talking. However, Dyer's persistence only escalated the tension. Fueled by exasperation and a deeper sense of moral outrage, Sanderson's frustration boiled over, manifesting in a torrent of physical violence aimed at silencing Dyer's words. Yet, even as the assault ceased, Dyer persisted in his verbal barrage, now framing his actions as a mere setup, a scenario where he was unjustly framed for his crimes. This final declaration, a seemingly feeble attempt at vindication, was the breaking point for Sanderson. He had had enough. The accumulated frustration and revulsion surged within him, compelling him to take drastic measures. With a few swift punches, Sanderson rendered Dyer unconscious, his physical form finally succumbing to the onslaught. But that wasn't the end. Sanderson had decided to silence Dyer for good this time. Sanderson retrieved Dyer's shoelaces, an innocuous item now destined for a sinister purpose. Methodically, he interwove the laces, transforming them into a lethal instrument of retribution. Sanderson wrapped Dyer's neck with the makeshift garrote and strangled him. Finally, there was silence. In the aftermath, Sanderson offered his justification for his actions. To Sanderson, Dyer was nothing more than a filthy child molester, a transgressor of an unforgivable boundary. As far as he was concerned, the heinousness of such a crime transcended conventional retribution. It demanded a more extreme form of justice. In Sanderson's worldview, there existed a spectrum of criminality where some actions stood as an affront to the very fabric of humanity itself, crimes that, according to his rationale, warranted death. The news of the incident quickly spread across the internet like wildfire, igniting impassioned dialogues and triggering a barrage of opinions. Some individuals, viewing the act through a lens of moral absolutism, decried the murder as a transgression, a vigilante act that flouted the established systems of justice. Others, however, embraced Sanderson as a hero, an embodiment of the rage and vengeance that the collective psyche sometimes yearns for. These voices hailed him like he was some sort of crusader who had extinguished a malevolent presence from the world. While he adamantly believed that Dyer deserved what happened to him, Sanderson rejected the label of hero that some fervently bestowed upon him. In stark and categorical terms, he disassociated himself from the glorification, simply stating that he did what needed to be done in the time that was given. Sanderson further went on to say that he didn't judge Dyer. Stating that God was the ultimate judge, Sanderson said all he did was set up the appointment. According to Sanderson, he did have some sympathy for Dyer's family, but for Dyer himself, he couldn't spare even a sliver of remorse. The mother of the girl who was assaulted said, "I cried and I laughed. It was a bunch of mixed emotions. For her, even though she didn't want to see anyone die, she was happy for her daughter. She said it was a relief for her to know that this was never going to happen again." Jonathan Watson. Within the confines of the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility and State Prison in Corcoran, a chilling turn of events unfolded as a single day witnessed the demise of not one, but two individuals accused of child molestation. The instigator of this brutal retribution was none other than Jonathan Watson, a 41-year-old inmate incarcerated for first-degree murder and the intentional discharge of a firearm leading to grave injury or death. The corridors of the prison resonated with a grim sense of irony as Watson, himself ensnared within the prison system, took it upon himself to administer a macabre, a form of justice, embodying the stark complexities of a life behind bars. Watson confessed in a letter that he had beaten 2 child molesters to death with a cane, hours after he urgently warned a counselor that might become violent. His warning was ignored, and soon enough, all hell broke loose. In the days leading up to the brutal attack, a series of decisions paved the path to a horrifying climax within the prison walls. An ill-fated change in Jonathan Watson's security classification led to his relocation from a solitary cell to a less secure dormitory, a shift that would bear grave consequences. Watson, himself a prisoner with a tumultuous history, voiced his dissent over this move, a sentiment that would be underscored by the disturbing events that followed. 6 days after Watson's transfer, a new inmate, accused of child molestation, entered the same prison pod. Watson's claims suggested that this individual reveled in a twisted form of taunting, openly indulging in children's television programs, a chilling detail that set Watson's anger ablaze. The relentless irritation he felt was more than a mere annoyance. It became an insatiable itch, an urge that his instincts, however dark, were compelling him to address. As the night unfolded, sleep eluded Watson, the weight of his unfulfilled compulsion haunting his every moment. The clock was ticking and the tension was growing in the air. Watson's urgency escalated and he resorted to a plea, confiding in a prison guard counselor about his overwhelming need for a return to higher-level security to avert a drastic outcome. His words echoed with desperation, a plea that tragically found no resonance with the counselor, who simply brushed off his concerns with an indifferent shrug. Left to grapple with the weight of his volatile emotions, Watson returned to his housing pod, his thoughts swirling as he grappled with the imminent explosion of his simmering rage. The catalyst arrived in the form of the first alleged molester, who brazenly flicked on the television to a children's program, an audacious act that ignited a firestorm within Watson. This provocative display proved to be the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, amplifying the collective frustration within the pod. Amid the brewing turmoil, someone else vocalized the incredulity shared by many, questioning whether the individual would truly subject them to his unsettling viewing choices, in a moment that could only be. Described as a convergence of emotions and opportunity, Watson took a stand, declaring with chilling determination, "I got this," and in his words, went to work on him. Armed with a cane, his chosen instrument, he unleashed a wave of aggression, his violence fueled by a potent blend of indignation, disgust, and a raw thirst for retribution. He violently beat the man with a stick, inflicting a fatal injury to his head and leaving him for dead. Watson left the housing pod to find a guard and turned himself in. But in what could be defined as either a bad coincidence or divine providence, Watson ran into another known child trafficker. According to Watson, he just decided to do everybody a favor. Watson wrote, "In for a penny, in for a pound." He brutally beat the second child molester with the cane before proceeding to tell a guard who, at first, didn't believe him. It wasn't until he looked around the corner and saw the mess Watson had left in his wake. Watson wrote, "Being a lifer, I'm in a unique position where I sometimes have access to these people, and I have so little to lose, and trust me, we get it. These people are every parent's worst nightmare." One of the prisoners that Watson beat up, 48-year-old David Bobb, died that same day. The other 62-year-old Graham DeLuis Conti, died 3 days later at a hospital. Both of them were serving life sentences for aggravated sexual assault of a child under the age of 14. Watson himself, who was 41 years old at the time, had served 10 years into his life sentence for murder when he decided to add 2 more murders to his name. The Associated Press found in a 2015 analysis that male offenders were being killed at a rate double their percentage in California's prison population, often because they are targeted by other inmates for their crimes against children. Shane Goldsby. The ill-fated meeting between Shane Goldsby and Robert Munger was the sort of thing one would expect to see only in movies. It seemed so perfectly scripted that coincidence wouldn't even describe the circumstances surrounding what transpired. What was so special about this encounter, and why did it lead to such a harrowing and deadly conclusion? Well, it all started with Robert Munger, who was a child rapist, the sort of person anyone with any morals would condemn for his heinous acts. Munger was arrested in 2017 after one of his victims spoke with investigators. During the trial, she described one occasion where she was too scared to move or even to tell him to stop when he assaulted her. After that assault, Munger threatened to have her evicted if she ever told anyone, but that wasn't going to keep her from seeking justice. Further investigation revealed that the electronic devices in his home had thousands of images of child pornography, and detectives were able to identify 2 named victims of physical abuse by Munger. Munger was convicted in several cases of child abuse that took 4 trials and 2 years to bring to a conclusion. While in jail, before his sentencing, Munger could be heard yelling and cursing from within the jail. He appeared underweight, a very lean figure, too physically weak to do much. Munger had been on suicide watch as he had been reluctant to eat or even cooperate with the jail staff. Before he was sentenced, Munger clung to the bars of the courtroom cell and rambled on, giving a statement which lasted 21 minutes. He often interrupted proceedings throughout the court process. He claimed that one of the victims was in fact an accomplice, and that any evidence that could have exonerated him was barred from trial. "You have ruined a lot of my childhood," a victim wrote in a letter. "You need to be punished for what you have done to me as much as they can punish you." Munger was eventually sentenced to 43 years in prison for crimes. Everyone seemed to agree that no sentence was sufficient for a man this vile, but that would soon change. Skipping over to Shane Goldsby, the then 26-year-old man had stolen a patrol car, after which he led the State Highway Patrol on a rather lengthy chase, which culminated in the crash and injuring of a trooper before he was arrested. Apparently, Goldsby had more than a dozen disputes with prison guards, and those disputes ended up being the reason he was repeatedly transferred until 2020, when he was ultimately transferred to the same cell as Robert Munger. Goldsby said that Munger wouldn't stop bragging about his crimes, which included child molestation, child rape, and child porn. He kept giving details of things that happened, details which greatly irritated Goldsby. Munger kept talking about his viciously malicious activities until he recounted a particular victim. The description of one of Munger's victims was eerily familiar to Goldsby. Then it hit him. That was his own underage sister Munger was talking about. Goldsby was furious. He described the situation as hitting the jackpot in a casino 7 times. Goldsby went to the prison guards and requested a new cellmate, a desperate attempt to stop himself from doing the unthinkable. The guards failed to pay heed to the tension building up until it became too much. In a fit of rage, Goldsby killed Munger, hitting him in the face and head area 14 times, then stomped on his head at least 4 times, gave him a few kicks, and walked away. Munger, who was an old man at the age of 70, did not survive the assault. Goldsby owned up to the crime afterward. He claimed he was set up. Otherwise, why would he be put in the same cell with the very guy who assaulted his sister? Despite the policies put in place by the State Department of Corrections to prevent such volatile crossovers, no one could have predicted this turn of events. An investigation was launched, and it was soon revealed that the officials were not aware of the connection between Goldsby and Munger before putting them in the same cell. The chances of something like this happening were next to none, and yet it happened. Goldsby had to face a murder trial. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison for the murder of Robert Munger after delivering an emotional apology to the victim's family in the courtroom. "Cannot imagine what it would be like to lose a loved one in this kind of way," his statement said. "To his wife and his whole family, I apologize. I am so sorry, and I hope you are able to heal from what I caused." Given the situation, one cannot really blame Goldsby for what happened, especially given the fact that he tried to restrain himself from doing anything drastic. The crimes committed by Munger were despicable enough, but to suddenly discover that one of the victims was his own sister must have been too much to condone, so much so that he was driven to get his hands dirty, even though he ultimately regretted his actions. Paul Fitzgerald. Paul Fitzgerald is best known for putting an end to the life of the infamous child predator, Richard Huckle. Huckle's crimes sent shockwaves through the international community, sparking a debate on how best to prevent such incidents from ever happening again. Richard Huckle was a freelance photographer from Ashford in Kent, who launched a campaign of terror against vulnerable children, an operation which spanned nearly a decade. He first visited Malaysia when he was just 19 years old on a gap year. He eventually moved to Southeast Asia and began using his position as a teacher to gain access to the most vulnerable children in the community, most of whom were orphans and were orphans living in care. One time, he even took one 5-year-old out to celebrate her 5th birthday before molesting her. He deliberately moved to a part of the world where he believed he could abuse vulnerable children without being caught, spending several years integrating himself into the community and making himself a trusted figure, a trust he would betray in the worst way imaginable. Huckle had created a pedophile manual titled Pedophiles and Poverty, Child Lover Guide, what would later be described by a judge as a truly evil document. Huckle was definitely sick in the head, considering all the things he did and all that he planned to do. One of his plans was to marry one of his young victims and start his own foster home. He hoped to create a cycle of children that would live in his home and then leave. He would then raise more children, turning his sick abuse to a full-time role. Huckle also planned to turn his pedophilia into a full-time job by crowdfunding the release of images he'd taken himself. When police found and cracked into a part of his hard drive, they found more than 20,000 abuse images on his laptop. Only a truly sick individual could do such unspeakable things. Huckle made his victims pose for images which he sold for bitcoins on the dark web. He boasted about how easy it was to abuse children who came from impoverished backgrounds. Huckle created a ledger in which he put down horrific details of his sick abuse. He scored the scale of the abuse that each of his victims was subjected to. From these notes, police were able to deduce that he could have targeted as many as 200 young victims, an unprecedented amount for a single offender. One of his victims was as young as 6 months. He was finally arrested in December 2014 when he returned home to spend Christmas with his family. Authorities had been investigating a pedophile ring that operated a website of the dark web, and it led them to Huckle. He was brought into custody, but because he had no criminal records, he was released on bail. His parents questioned him about the allegations, and he told the truth to his horrified mother and father, who couldn't harbor such a human being under their roof. He was kicked out of the house and placed back in custody where he awaited trial. Richard Huckle pleaded guilty to 71 charges of crimes against young people, but investigators believed him to be responsible for much more than that because of Huckle's refusal to hand over passwords for encrypted areas of his hard drive. It took more than an hour to read out each of Huckle's 71 charges, which included assault and sexual activity with a child. Huckle was handed 22 life sentences. Even the judge couldn't stomach Huckle's behavior, telling him, "Your offending behavior became entrenched in your everyday life. Your life revolved around your sexual activities with young children. Your distorted beliefs in respect of children are deep-seated. Your self-delusion knows no bounds." As Huckle was taken to his jail, a member of the public shouted, "1,000 deaths is too good for you. Well, one only gets to die once." And for Huckle, that once would come soon enough and in a horrific manner. Huckle was 3 years into his sentence when he met with a grim fate. Fellow inmate and psychopath Paul Fitzgerald had been planning to kill Huckle and a couple more prisoners. He started with Huckle in an attack that lasted almost 80 minutes, strangling him, raping him with a kitchen implement before stabbing him repeatedly with a makeshift knife. He also forced a pen up his nose and into his brain, a truly brutal assault that's sure to make the faint-hearted lightheaded just thinking about it. Jurors were told that the attack was prolonged and designed to humiliate Huckle. Fitzgerald said he wanted Huckle to feel what his victims had felt, calling what transpired poetic justice. According to Fitzgerald, he had been planning to kill other prisoners too, but he lost himself in how much fun he was having while torturing Huckle. Fitzgerald himself had a plethora of offenses in his name. Shockingly, he and Huckle were pedophiles. Fitzgerald reportedly boasted in one diary entry, "I'm a pedophile, and I'm the best." He committed his first offense when he was still just 12 years old, when he assaulted a 4-year-old child. After that, it was one offense after another, including assault. It was like he couldn't help himself. For the murder of Richard Huckle, Fitzgerald was sentenced to life in prison, to serve at least 34 years behind bars. Christopher Scarver. Christopher Scarver will forever be known as the man who killed the notorious serial killer and offender Jeffrey Dahmer, whose arrest in 1991 provoked criticism of local police and resulted in an upsurge of popular interest in serial murder among other crimes. Scarver, born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is the second of 5 children. He attended James Madison High School, but dropped out in the 11th grade. At a young age, he became addicted to alcohol and marijuana, an addiction that led to his eviction from his mother's house. He became a trainee carpenter at a Wisconsin Conservation Corps job program. His drinking problem worsened after he never got the full-time position he was promised upon completion of his trainee program. Unfortunately, his supervisor was dismissed before that could become a reality. While in his drunken state, Scarver began hearing voices calling him the chosen one. Later on, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was said to have been suffering from messianic delusions. On June 1st, 1990, Scarver went to the Wisconsin Conservation Training Program office and found the site manager John Fyon and employee Steve Lohman present. Scarver pulled a gun and forced Lohman down, demanding money from Fyon, who was only able to muster $15, which he handed to Scarver. An enraged Scarver shot and killed Lohman. According to authorities, Scarver then said, "Now do you think I'm kidding? I need more money." Scarver proceeded to shoot the already dead Lohman twice more, and that was enough to frighten Fyon, who then wrote Scarver a check of $3,000, which would be almost $7,000 in today's money. As Fyon fled to his car outside, Scarver shot at him, but he missed. In 1992, Scarver was convicted and sentenced to life in prison and sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. 2 years later, on November 28, 1994, Scarver was assigned to a morning work detail. His partners for this work were Jesse Anderson, an inmate serving time for the murder of his wife, and Jeffrey Dahmer, a cannibalistic serial killer and sex offender. Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer and sex offender known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. He is known to have killed and dismembered 17 males. Although he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, Dahmer was found to be legally sane at his trial. On January 30th, 1989, Dahmer pleaded guilty to the charges of second-degree sexual assault and of enticing a child for immoral purposes. This was before Dahmer murdered his 5th victim. On February 17th, 1992, he was handed 15 life sentences for having been convicted convicted of 15 of the 16 homicides which he committed in Wisconsin and was later sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment for an additional homicide which he committed in Ohio in 1978. It was a mere 3 weeks after his graduation that Dahmer committed his first murder. It occurred in 1978, and for the next 13 years, Dahmer committed horrific murders, many of which involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and permanent preservation of body parts, typically all or part of the skeleton. Jeffrey Dahmer ran out of luck when he attempted to make a man named Tracy Edwards into his next victim. After carefully planning his escape from Dahmer's apartment, Edwards punched Dahmer in the face, knocking him off balance and giving him just enough time to exit the front door. Edwards led 2 police officers back to the apartment, only for them to discover that Dahmer had been killing and butchering people in his apartment. As Dahmer lay pinned on the floor beneath one of the officers, he turned his head towards the officers and muttered the words, "For what I did, I should be dead." That death would eventually come in a brutal fashion. Back to that morning cleaning routine in his prison with Scarver, part of their work detail included cleaning the prison gymnasium toilet. When the corrections officers left the 3 unsupervised, Scarver attacked Jeffrey Dahmer with a metal bar that he had removed from a piece of exercise equipment in the prison weight room. He then proceeded to bludgeon Jesse Anderson with a wooden stick at the showers. When he was done, he returned to his cell and informed a corrections officer, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead." Scarver received 2 more life sentences for both murders. It is believed that he murdered Dahmer because many of the people Dahmer killed were black men. Anderson, Scarver killed because he attempted to blame his wife's death on 2 black men. Therefore, it was deduced that both murders were racially motivated. Scarver was quoted as having said, "Nothing white people do to blacks is just." If you enjoyed this video, click on the card on your screen for more content like this. See you next time.